Hi, I'm here with Lily, the president of Solana Foundation. Hi, Lily. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
We'd love to know a little bit more about Solana Foundation. Can you introduce it a little bit?
Sure. Well, Solana ecosystem is now one of the largest ecosystems in the industry. So Solana was started in 2017, 2018 as the way to build a more scalable blockchain, one of many efforts at the time. And Solana from the very beginning had this kind of unique, almost radical for the viewpoints at the time, take instead of automatically presuming you were going to shard, right? To try to put as much performance as you could into a single chain, because then you would be better able to do the things that, in our opinion, blockchains are made to be, which is to be global financial infrastructure and to therefore have all applications and all liquidity to the greatest extent possible all in the same place. So that was one of the original kind of perspectives that Solana's had. And I think over time that's played out. And the Solana Foundation, it's many projects will have kind of like this foundation that will typically be a bit of a steward and also funder of public goods for the growth of the ecosystem. And so that's the role that we also have as the Solana Foundation. And there's a whole range of public goods, from technical public goods to more growth-oriented public goods, that we try to support and try to be a long-term steward of the growth of the ecosystem.
I think over time, there's been many applications that's been built on Solana. Can you tell me about one of maybe your favorite one, or one that is incredibly innovative that you've seen on Solana?
Yeah, there's so many. And I think that in the same way that, the early days of the internet, if you were going to ask people to predict what was going to be built on the internet, I think maybe only a very few number of people would have said something like social media is going to be built, right? So I think that is what's also happening for our industry right now. And some of the things that we try to look for are what are applications that can only be built using blockchain, right? So I really love DePIN as an example, and I think that's really evolved brilliantly over time. So this idea that you could have these decentralized hardware node networks that collectively could build infrastructure resources that otherwise would have taken a huge amount of centralized capex, right? So what we see right now is Helium. A number of years ago, they bootstrapped this Wi-Fi network, or the cellular network. Now they're using that to actually build a commercial cellular network that is more competitive than your average MVNO. It's a blend between MVNO kind of carrier bandwidth and then also community source bandwidth. And that's pretty amazing, right? If you think about how useful that actually is, and if we can prove that model out in a developed market like the US, then maybe this is a model for building out infrastructure in different categories and different geographies as well. I think that's really cool.
So what is, with all the DePIN in the space that's been built out, all the projects, new infrastructure, what is Solana currently focused on?
Well, I think we're general purpose infrastructure. And I think that's also been a perspective of Solana's from the very beginning, especially the last few years. There's been a lot of interest and emphasis on application-specific chains. And while I think there is a role for application-specific chains, if you think about what the core purpose of blockchain is, and I know on that already there's a number of people who have different perspectives. My perspective is that blockchain has always been about financialization and creating markets around practically any form of scarcity. And so if it's fundamentally around financialization, you could say, for example, NFTs. Was that around collectibles, or was it around financialization of JPEGs? A little bit of both, right? And if that's the case, then this is fundamentally infrastructure for global financial markets. First order requirement of financial market is to have unified liquidity. As a result, that's something that is really a first order requirement of building a performant, long-lasting, scalable, and also adoption-oriented blockchain. And that's what we're seeking to do. That's something that is extensible to practically any vertical, right? If you look at every vertical in blockchain, what's happening? It has something to do with financialization and either something that's based in trading or transactional economy. And whether, it's trading or transactional economy, I guess you could call that payments, money always wants to be around money. And those markets always work better when you have a maximally unified market.
And now with AI coming into the picture, how do you see AI playing a part in all this?
Well, I think that's an interesting one. If you rewind at least 10 years, maybe even longer, there was a lot of discourse around if you have this money that is turned data into money and money into data, then that means this is now money that machines could even exchange amongst themselves, right? Because machines exchange data, and if now data is money, well, then they can exchange money. So way back when, that was called like the many machine market or the machine to machine market, like MMM, right? That was a long time ago. And now with AI agents, that's essentially what is very much on the horizon. And so when you pair that with something like DePIN, where you have this decentralized sort of network of hardware that anyone can enter or leave the network with, and then you add on to that the ability to have programmable money layered with the intelligence of AI agents, then that becomes pretty powerful. And that's really not that far off, where you can actually see some pretty cool things happen with that. Okay, so what are some examples? Here's like a very Wall Street oriented example. There's certain times of year when people really want ground level data on what's going to be happening in retail demand in the holiday season, right? How do you get ahead of that? Well, you could watch all of the ships coming into the bay and count the number of containers to try to get some leading indicators of what demand is going to be like this holiday season. So people would pay for that data. But how are you going to source that data from in relatively real time from all of the ports around the world? Actually, all it would really take is to have 1 or 2 cameras positioned in all of the busiest ports around the world, right? But it's kind of hard to do that. But if you could build a DePIN network around that potentially, and then also have automated payment streams around that, that's a very feasible thing to do these days. So those are the types of things that are useful. They have a market. It's sort of sensational. I was talking about something like meme coins. But what we're here to do is we're not here to just be focused on whatever the next Beanie Baby speculation cycle is, but we're here to think about, conceive of, and advance those really unique use cases that you can only do if you have blockchains.
Interesting. So do you have anything to say to Ethereum devs to get them to come to Solana?
Yeah, I mean, we love builders who are building cool applications. And one of the reasons why people have really loved building on Solana is they love the tech, they love the community. And so give it a try.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.